All right, hey everybody. As we talked about before, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of the Copilot basics from what I found so far. I'm playing with it for a couple of weeks. Again, these are kind of just my experiences, how to kind of use it, where things are living at, what are some things you can do around it, part of a mini series here. So the first thing I'm going to talk about really is how you interact with it. Interesting enough, there's different ways you interact with Copilot as opposed to, say, ChatGPT, which is kind of one window, but it makes sense because it's the whole Microsoft ecosystem, right? So after you install it, it took about, I don't know, several hours for my licenses to kind of update and some of the apps to update. So your mileage may vary. Had to do some updates, some logging out, logging in. But one of the things that was interesting to notice was that you can really drive with it from Microsoft Teams. So you get the new button here that says Copilot. You kind of have walking through, hey, what can I do with it? Here's some prompts. Then the other option you can go do is basically copilot.microsoft. And what's interesting is, this is where you can kind of then shift it from Copilot from work to say then Copilot from web. Whereas the one for Teams is really focused around, I would say, Copilot for work. Some interesting differences around, here it shows kind of creative snapshots. I can say, hey, generate a picture or something. Whereas the one for work is really targeted around your calendar information and things like that. So one of the things I'll kind of just start with and show you would be, hey, I want to look for a file or some type of, maybe a piece of information I have. So kind of just punch in a prompt here, looking for a file named test. Kind of come back to what it looks like. And this is where it hooks into your SharePoint, your OneDrive, your emails, your calendars, all kinds of good stuff, right? So you can kind of see here, find a file named test PDF, tells me I was the author of it, what it actually was, goes into some details about it, and things like that. Now, if I go over here on the team side, paste the same prompt, um, generally speaking, I get the same answers. So I have noticed a few inconsistencies once in a while, but for the most part, things are pretty consistent between what you see on the teams versus what you see on the web, right? So this is a little bit different on how it references things. Here it kind of just shows you what it is, but here you can actually kind of start clicking through my name and going through hyperlinks and things like that. And one thing you'll notice here is this 1 of 30. I wasn't sure what this meant, but basically this means you can only do 30 responses in what they call a chat. And then from there, you will have to generate a new chat. So I don't know if that's a limitation of the back end or what, but just something to be aware of and kind of what it goes through, right? So been looking through this from also a security perspective to see if I can abuse this to give me information that it should have or shouldn't have. So you kind of see it tells you more information about the file or things to maybe ask. You can do a lot of things around prep for your meetings, prep for teams mentionings you're at. I won't really go through all that because then it kind of shows a lot of other information I don't want to go into right now. But then you can kind of talk about how to access the file, where it is, and things like that. So pretty straightforward, from that perspective. You can, like I said, looks through SharePoint, looks through OneDrive, looks through Teams information, but either way, pretty seamless to use. I find myself using it through Teams mostly because I spend a lot of time in Teams and the apps themselves versus uh, a browser-based window, right? So pretty simple, pretty straightforward to do. Save your chat history here. You can kind of go back and look at things. But now if I go to like the web, this is more where you get your creativeness, like, hey, um, create an image of a shark eating ice cream at the beach. And here there's actually a new file, a new tab of some recently called Notebook. Haven't really explored too much with that, but you can see, Copilot's doing its thing, generating an image. This is kind of where you're seeing a lot of these tons now of AI created images out there, but you can kind of quickly see that the difference between kind of personal versus work is this kind of toggle box up here. It does show protected up here, which there's a lot of security kind of that we'll dive into later on that, but just kind of gives you the general workflow of where things are. So what are some other things we can do with it? Well, for one is let's look at some things we can do around, say, Word documents, right? So this is actually a pretty old resume of mine, just using it for some, context here, but you'll kind of quickly see that, at least in the Mac OS versions, you have a new Copilot button. Click the button. You can start asking about the document. You can start prompting it to change things. It's a pretty interesting kind of way. You can summarize the document, ask a question like, "Hey, what's Derek good at?" Um, what is Derek good at? Kind of start to sort through and shift and basically take the context from the Word document and then give you some information back around it. So if maybe you weren't in a meeting or you have a document you haven't read in a while, it's a pretty good way to maybe summarize things, ask it some basic questions to kind of go from there, right? So here it kind of summarizes, cloud computing, some data centers, long-term CCIE, all that kind of good stuff. And you can kind of see where it gives you references and things like that. So another way that you can interact with it is really kind of just by highlighting something. You'll see the new Copilot button. You can click on this. You can right-click on, click on Copilot, rewrite Copilot. It'll kind of start drafting some rewrites for you. It gives you some options around, funny, creative, witty, things like that nature. So it's pretty interesting what you can kind of do with that. And I find myself using it to help maybe change some words around or come up with different ways to say certain things. But it's more of something I would say that's going to be helping something than generating from scratch, right? You can kind of start playing with the sliders, professional, how long you want things like that, right? And it usually kind of gives you 2 to 3 different options, and you can kind of click and replace and things like that. So it's pretty seamlessly integrated from that standpoint. So I like that things are built into each app, right? So from a Word perspective, Excel, PowerPoint, they all do different things, but they all have a seamless kind of way that you interact with it, right? Versus having to take this, go back over to here, paste it, rewrite it, and then come back to Word and go from there. So I think Microsoft done a good job with doing the integration from that standpoint, right? Microsoft Excel, same thing. Here's just a random kind of table I found on the internet. And again, you'll see the Copilot button here. This one's probably been more powerful to me because you can kind of use it to ask questions. You can create formulas with it. You can do analysis on it, right? So you can kind of say highlight. When you highlight the cells, you can ask it questions and say, summarize this in table. Create a simple table for this data. Sometimes it does take longer than others. I have noticed maybe probably depending on what the backend load, but for the most part, it responds fairly quickly and kind of can generate some things if you want it. Okay, so here's one. I probably gave it the bad instructions on that to be a little more too broad. But you can say, okay, let's look at some data insights, for example, as to what this looks like, and kind of go from there, right? So again, having it integrated from a Copilot perspective, I like the buttons that are easy to use and kind of up on top there from that perspective. PowerPoint, kind of similar. It can do a little bit more from like a design perspective, right? So you can kind of say, summarize the slide deck. You can ask it questions about it. You can organize it. You can even have it create slides, right? So we can say create a new intro slide, and it'll kind of take some best guesses and create some things. I have noticed that trying to use the same fonts and same look and feel. So is it perfect? No, but it's a good way to kind of just again get you some information. You can kind of see here it uses some of our same fonts that we use for some other things as well, and kind of go from there. So it's pretty good about what it can do from that perspective, right? So again, very much built into the app from a Copilot button perspective. So once you kind of get used to where things are, I find myself, fairly easy to kind of operate and use the thing around fairly easy. Outlook is probably a little bit different because it does use a couple different other buttons. So it's you can kind of have a Copilot for sales. There's another one called Copilot for services, which I haven't gotten into yet. So more to come on those, right? But for example, you can have it draft an email. You can kind of do some coaching. So if I say draft with Copilot, what do you want the email to say? Write an email about a new CISO service for see companies. You can generate it, and one of the things that is to kind of show is you can do, make it a poem, right? So you might think it's kind of strange, but at least kind of shows you what it can kind of do from that perspective. So again, once you kind of see where the buttons are and what the logos look like, it's pretty easy to kind of work and operate from a Copilot perspective, right? So here you can kind of say it's a, interesting, kind of funny, but hey, it's creates a poem for you, just a real simple a sentence, right? So I find myself using it to kind of search for certain things, because I think it does a deeper dive, looking into say SharePoint and OneDrive and helping maybe who authored some things. So this is kind of just a real basic video of what the overview looks like, how to kind of use it. The integration's also there from a mobile standpoint, so there is some buttons from there if you're using iPhone or whatnot, they are there as well. So stay tuned for more videos to come around the security aspects and other comparisons to ChatGPT. Thanks for watching.